And hello, everybody. Mr. Constitution, Douglas V. Gibbs. And this is the last episode before our 250th anniversary. Day after tomorrow is America 250. Of course, my voice is clear until I get on the air. Welcome to the program. I am Douglas V. Gibbs, and I'm really glad to be here. Got my Independence Day, one of my Independence Day shirts on. The one I'm actually wearing to church on Sunday is a little dressier and got United States. It's got some scenes from history and Statue of Liberty, stuff like that. And then I've got, let's see if we can fix this a little bit here. And so then see, for Saturday, I believe I'm wearing that shirt. Tomorrow I've got a kind of a pullover, kind of red, white, and blue deal. Yesterday I was wearing a shirt, and on the back of it, it says, if you can't respect this flag that has the American flag, it says, I'll help you pack. And it amazes me because when I wear that shirt, I get so many kudos for that shirt. People love that shirt. People, I like the shirt. Had a hat on also. Was it yesterday I was wearing the hat? Yesterday. Yes, it was yesterday. And it has a rifle, kind of an AR-15 style rifle, might be an AR-15. I really haven't taken a close look at it. And it says, go ahead and take it. The Alamo, Texas kind of, or come and take it. Not go ahead and take it, come and take it. Yeah. But anyway, I have a shirt that matches that hat. Sometimes I'll wear them together. Second Amendment hat, stuff like that. So, but I am jazzed, 250. I was alive. I was a young man when the 1976 bicentennial celebrations was going on. I think I mentioned this perhaps last week. I have on some other programs that I do, and I was like a 10-year-old kid, and but I remember it vividly. And I was at an age where I was beginning to get into history. I was beginning to understand what it was all about. Largely because of Schoolhouse Rock. Schoolhouse Rock, I loved that stuff. The preamble one was one of my favorites. No More Kings, which they've twisted that to mean something else. It's got King Charles, or King George. I'm sorry, King George. Sitting on a throne on the other side of the pond, eating a turkey leg, and kind of doing this to the colonists and stuff, Got the Revolutionary War, videos. It was good stuff. And I agree with a lot of the Democrats' rhetoric on the surface, but I don't agree with what they mean. They like to play with language. They say, well, they're pro-immigration. I'm pro-immigration. But they include illegal aliens into that term immigration. And so you're either all in or all out. So if you say, well, I don't agree with the illegal alien part, deport them, but I agree with immigration. No, you're anti-immigration. That's not what I said. That's what you are. You're either all in or you're all out. This is kind of the way they operate. And I'll say, well, I hate big corporations that collude with government and control everything. I agree. I have a problem with big corporations when they collude with government and they use that political strength, that political collateral, not collateral, that political, what is it? That's not the right word, but you know what I mean. They use their political influence. Influence will have to do, to push things. I agree. That's a bad thing. So therefore, down with all corporations. No, not quite. Well, the costs are too high. Affordability. Well, my whole life, everybody's been complaining that things cost too much. That's a part of just being alive. Often things are more than what you want, but that doesn't mean that you then have the government take over control and you have government grocery stores, government healthcare, because usually the cost is better the more that government's out of your hair. And always the cost is better if it's a free market versus a socialist system. But they have decided that And, it's funny. Let me back up for a second, because I'm actually totally winging today. I didn't write anything to follow. Usually I have some few scripts, few notes, whatever. I am totally winging it. I was like, you know what? Busy day. I'm just gonna go for it. And so I was watching TV, and Fox News has something going on where, as America 250 is going, or at the beginning of the commercial breaks, they'll have like one of their stars come out and talk about one of the battles of American Revolution, or what something means, or something like that. And I want to say it was Fox. I think it was Fox. And they had Teddy Roosevelt, kind of caricature image, whatever, on the screen, talking about communism, the dangers of communism, how Teddy Roosevelt understand this. Well, Teddy Roosevelt, though, was a complete progressive. He was the early stages of communism. He was heavily influenced by the Fabians. Progressive, liberalism, in the sense of not the classic liberalism, but, well, government's got to do this for people. That is the early stages. It is not necessarily socialism per se, but it's moving in that direction. And so it's interesting when you hear a quote by someone like Teddy Roosevelt condemning socialism while practicing the early stages of it. That's like spending your whole life talking about how we've got to do something to stop lung cancer, but being a smoker all your life. You're probably going to head in that direction if you're smoking. You're probably going to wind up with the very thing you claim is not good, because you're heading in that direction. The way I like to explain it is the Democrats, in particular, the establishment here. Before the Democrats, you had the Federalist Party, the big government-minded, utopian-minded, government's got to be more involved-minded people. They've always been pushing an envelope, because, see, it reminds me of a question a guy was asked one time. How rich is rich enough? And he responded. I can't remember who it was off the top of my head, but it was somebody well-known, wealthy guy, and he says, always $1 more. The envelope always has to be pushed. I love to golf. I go golfing now once a week lately. I'm trying to get back into the game. I used to go about every other week when I was a young man. And my wife asked me, well, because I tell her, I said, I'm a duffer. I'm not real good. I'm better than some. I'm not as good as others. And she says, well, when will you be good? I said, never. She says, well, you shouldn't be so hard on yourself. No, you don't understand. No matter how good you get, you always believe you can be better, and you're not good enough. That's the way it works. So even scratch golfers, they want to be handicap golfers, I guess you would call it. If you normally shoot 10 over par, you want to be 5 under par. If you normally shoot, 20 over par, you want to be 15 under par. If you shot in my case, this 9-hole that I do, and if you shoot, 10 over par, you want to be 9 over par the next time. It's never, it's, you're always pushing for that next. That's the way the left is. So you ask, how progressive is progressive enough? Always a little bit more. So when you have someone like Teddy Roosevelt, who's the first progressive president, he's a Republican, but he's progressive, saying something that, communism is a problem, communism is bad, dude, you are supporting the early stages of the very thing that you're claiming is bad. So, excuse me. So I'm watching this, and now we have the Democrats, and they're the Democratic Socialists, communists are taking over the party. So how'd this happen? You guys have always been pushing the early stages of it. More government involvement, when you're always pushing for more and more government involvement in healthcare, in, just redistributing wealth through taxing the rich, so on and so forth, you're in the early stages of what becomes communism. It may take 10 years, it may take 100 years, it may take 200 years, But if you're going to push in that direction, you're going to eventually get there. And that's what's happening. And then the communists, they know this. And so what have they done? They've infiltrated our country. Oh, Doug, that's conspiracy theory. Really? I've been told that my whole life. I was talking about the infiltration of communism into this country when I was a teenager during the late 70s, early 80s. I was talking about it. They infiltrated. They're in the education system. They're in the media. They're in, the halls of Congress. They're in the, the bureaucracy. They're in our colleges. And so forth. And, the entertainment, they have flooded our system. So, yeah, but Doug, people can have a different opinion. I agree. I freedom of speech. You want to be a hard left socialist, commie, whatever in America, you can be that, but you can't turn America into that because it's unconstitutional. The Constitution was written to avoid communism. Speak, Doug. So, well, Doug, no, communism didn't exist back then. The founding fathers weren't aware of it. Yeah, they were. Karl Marx was not around yet. Karl Marx had not rehashed an old idea and then called it new yet. Friedrich Hegel, or William Friedrich Hegel, was just starting. He hadn't even started his thing yet. So, the roots of what we call socialism, communism had not happened yet, but it existed. And the founding fathers talked about it often. They just didn't call it that. They didn't call it socialism. They didn't call it communism because those words were not labels that we were using yet. They had not been developed into the American vernacular yet. They used words like utopianism, communitarianism, collectivism, the schemes of leveling. That was Samuel Adams' way to describe a redistribution of wealth. They talked about this stuff. The Constitution was designed, our American system was designed to protect us from that. They were there to protect us against tyranny. And the tyranny they knew was either monarchies and collective systems. Whenever you consolidate power, and in collective systems, the power is consolidated in the name of the people. The people's this and the people's that. But in the end, it's not for the people. What happens is, Karl Marx explains, you have to understand that you have to have socialism. In other words, government in order to get to communism. To him, communism was when everybody accepted it, everybody gave in, everybody laid down, skipping through the daisies together, holding hands, and we're all equal, and we will work for the community and blah, 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 blah. But you can't get people to accept that easily, so you have to first force it upon them, and then once they get used to it and realize it's a wonderful thing, then the big government will fade away. That was his theory. Ever seen a big government fade away? No. And what socialism is giving the means of production to the people. That's the way it's described. But in the name of the people, it's the socialist government, until the people are ready for it. The socialist government's never going to give up that power. But here's the thing. When you have the means of production done in such a way, it eliminates innovation. It eliminates incentive. It takes away from those that would do really well. Well, Doug, we don't want people being better than other people. Yeah, we do. I want my team to have the best athletes possible. I want the superior athletes on my team so they can win. Right? I mean, for you sports fans, right? You want the Pete Rose and the Aaron Judge and the Babe Ruth and the Mike Schmidt and the Bo Jackson, if you want to talk football, and Joe Montana and Tom Brady and Marcus Allen and Jack Youngblood, and show you how old I am. You want those superior athletes. Why? Because you want to win. Doug, well, I think we should just have, people that are just working together equally. And, we got to make sure that there's an equal number of this color and that color. Make sure there's not, because, that's the fair thing to do. Well, then you're going to have a losing team. And it's just not going to just lose. It's going to crash and burn badly. Ever heard about 1972 when the Miami Dolphins went 17-0? You develop the team like we're talking about that the socialists want in government, and you're going to be 0-17. You're going to have a perfect record. You're going to have a perfectly miserable record. And that's what they're doing. Yeah, but Doug, it's the right thing to do. It's a fair thing to do. It may seem like the right thing to do from your heart's point of view, but from logic's point of view, common sense point of view, analytical point of view, it's not. Well, we just need to love each other and think with just listen to your heart. No, it'll lead you in the wrong direction. God tells us that in Jeremiah, the heart is wicked. And what he means by that is not to ignore your heart. Your heart is a very important part of who you are. It's funny because I was watching last night, and I didn't think this was going to come up, but I just got to realizing this. So there's this episode. It's season 1, I think episode 7 of Star Trek, the original series, Captain Kirk. And what happens on this in this episode is Captain Kirk gets split. His personalities get split when he's beaming up from a planet. So the soft, emotional, sensitive, feeling version, and then the harsh, aggressive, whatever version, right? Left to their own devices, they were failures. The soft one got to the point where he couldn't make any decisions because he was afraid of hurting anybody's feelings. And the harsh one didn't care about anybody's feelings, just stomped all over things and said, well, let's leave those people die on the planet. Let's go. Right? So we do need both sides, right? So you do need limited government and government, depending on what it is, and they work together. And the reason why I bring that up is because the socialists, well, Doug, you have a fire department, you have a police, that's socialism. No, it's not. That's government services. We need that. That's the part of the equation that government needs to possess, but they don't need to be on the other side. And the two check each other. Get too soft, the aggressive part makes sure that things get done. Get too aggressive, the heart part backs it off a little bit. Balance. It's funny. I've got a new book. I'm done writing it. I'm working on the index. Oh gosh, I've been saying it's going to be out in the next few weeks for the last month or so. But constitutional presidency of Donald J. Trump. And as I'm going through the index, and I'm like in G now, going through all. I've set up the terms, and now I'm searching and going through the book and finding the pages and all that jazz. And so far, the the word with the most pages, with the most page numbers in the index is balance. Balance is important, and that's what the Constitution is all about. The Democratic Socialists of America, they're taking over the Democratic Party, are anti-American. There is no balance. Now, that said, limited government, if you go too far, is anarchy. That's too far. So we need the balance. We need the two sides of Captain Kirk, so to speak. The aggressive part and the understanding part. So I am not sitting here saying, well, all these Democratic Socialists of America have no argument whatsoever. No, they're right. That sometimes things are expensive. We need to do things. There's whatever. But our Constitution was written to keep the excesses of that in check. And also, and here's the key, it's none of the federal government's business typically. It's a state issue. When I talk about my problem with my Medicaid and Medicare, they're technically unconstitutional. Oh, so you just want all these people not to have health insurance? No, I didn't say that. If a state wants to have a health program, a safety net, as they call it, for their people live in their state, great, do it. Shouldn't be the federal government. Federal government's got no authority. That's up to each state. And they will attract or repel people into their state based on their decisions. And it shouldn't be a way of life in most cases. There are some cases where people need it for many years, need help for maybe longer than that. But the problem is when you start giving them this help, they don't seek out doing it themselves very much because they got it. Why do they need to bend over backwards to make it happen? Why do I need to set aside money for this if I can get it for free, if I keep my income below a certain amount or whatever? Then there are people who go, well, I'm not going to be like that. I want to succeed. I want to do so well that the cost of medical insurance doesn't matter to me. I can get whatever car I want. Those are the aggressive sides, and they're good. Hey, have your heart out there in the culture. Have a heart. Look out for the poor. Try to be good stewards of the planet. And I understand. But you don't do that instead of the other. The other has to be left able to do its thing. You still need to unleash the aggressive side. Now, yes, once again, going back to the beginning of the show, I don't like it when they collude with government to get their way. But when they do really well and they have a corporation and they're producing lots of jobs and lots of products, guess what? We're on the good end of that. It's like I like to ask a lot of these communists to try to argue with me. Have you ever been hired by a poor person? Have you ever been hired, if other than government jobs, because of government? No. It was your merit because they grew a business. They took the chance. They stayed up late at nights to make sure it took off, and they created this big business. And now we've got this anti-American, anti-Christian, anti-everything going on, the Democratic Socialist America, and the cancer now has metastasized. Like I said, the Teddy Roosevelts, the Alexander Hamiltons, those are the early stages. Those are the early stages of what became the cancer. The progressive, the liberal, the Federalist Party, bigger government, those who fought for the Federal Reserve and the 16th and 17th Amendment, the Fabians, the Lincolnian Republicans, they were all the beginnings of the disease. They were the early stages. I hear Democrats say, "Well, we're not socialists, but we do believe in a lot of." No, you're the early stages of the problem. I get it. Once again, I understand that we want to do certain things for people. I get that, and that's what charities are for, and that's what states are for, not the federal government. The Constitution doesn't give that authority. The United States Constitution was written to keep the federal government out of domestic issues for the most part. There's a handful. And also, it was designed to stop democracy. We got to save our democracy. No, we don't. We need to get rid of the democracy, get back to being a republic. A little bit of democracy, just getting back to balance, getting back to the two sides of the coin. You want a little bit of both. We'll have a little bit of democracy. The House of Representatives has always been democratically voted in. The U.S. Senate was not. They were indirectly voted in. They were appointed by the state legislatures. And then people say, well, yeah, but the people were voting in the state legislatures. Well, not necessarily. They voted in the state House of Representatives, like the House of Representatives. But the state Senate, like the U.S. Senate, was indirectly voted in by the counties in most cases. Some of the cases they held a direct vote. It was up to each state, though. But in most cases, the state senators were appointed by the county leaderships, and it was one per county in the beginning and along the way. Not all the states, but most of the states. Someone asked me and said, well, Doug, do you have evidence of that? So a friend of mine, Brady the War Hamster, and I, on his channel, rumble.com/warhamster, capital W and capital H, it'll take you directly there, War Hamster. We've been going through Madison's notes, and it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they talked about exactly that, how the counties were involved with, state senates. And early on, that was the idea. Why? Because democracy alone can't be trusted. Democracy left to its own devices is dangerous. I have very sweet dogs, and I keep them on a leash when I'm out in public, or I hold them. And I tell people not to reach and try to touch their face, because one woman tried to, and my sweet little white lap dog tried to bite the person's hand. We can't take him because left to his own devices, he's not the sweet little creature he normally is. He has to be on his leash and around the house where he's supposed to operate. He's not supposed to go outside his parameters. As long as I limit, he's good. Federal government is that creature, man. As long as we keep it in its cage, in its restraints, no, don't worry. We'll unleash it when he's be unleashed. My dogs are great when someone who doesn't belong here is on the property. They're barking. They're ready to start biting ankles, whatever. That's their job. I almost wish they could grow into giant lions at that moment to scare off whoever it is and then shrink back into the cute little doggies they are. Because that's what the Constitution did with the federal government. I used to tell my classes that federal government, when they were creating it, they were originally, the intent was to improve upon or fix the Articles of Confederation. The problem with the Articles of Confederation is, as a central government, it was very weak, very limited. It was so limited that it was like being led by a lamb. You ever seen sheep lead anybody other than each other around in a circle? But you get a sheepdog out there. The sheepdog takes control. Well, let's put a lion in charge of those sheep. Well, the problem with the lion is it'll eat the sheep. So what you do is you have a lion on the property, but you don't let it have access to the sheep. But you have a caged door so that if there's an intruder, you open it up and it'll take care of business. That's our federal government. Founding fathers realized under the Articles of Confederation, we had a lamb. What they needed was a lion. But the problem is the lions will eat the people. So you direct the force of the federal government away from the people. So you give it the authorities to handle the external issues and issues that are directly related to the preservation of the union. But you let the states, the member states, take care of their own business. Because if the federal government gets involved, they're going to mess it up because their job isn't the internal stuff. Federal government's job is all that stuff. They did not create a national government. They created a federal government for a federation of states. So here we are. 250 years later, after this Declaration of Independence, 239 years later, after the U.S. Constitution was written, we would say take like 2 years off of that for when it's been in effect, 237 years. At a time where people understood the dangers of collectivism, the dangers of a centralized government, a national government, the dangers of not letting the states take care of the local issues, localism, and a lot of pride in what we had created. 250 years of pride in America, being proud to be an American. I was watching a newscast, and more than 90% of Republicans are extremely proud to be an American. 99% of MAGA voters. I don't know what's wrong with that other 1%, but so be it. You go over to the Democrats, go to Kamala voters, that's extremely proud to be an American. Depending on which poll you're looking at 30-something percent, 20-something percent. In one case, I saw something said like 14 or 12% or something like that. it is not wrong to say that the Democrats become an anti-American party. It says so in the polls. Well, Doug, aren't you doing the same thing that they were doing by calling all the MAGA people fascists? Now you're calling them communists. No. See, when they were calling their opposition fascist, they weren't defining the terms. What do you mean by fascist? Well, and they'll come up with a bunch of stuff which were the symptoms of fascism, but not what fascism was. Fascism is control of the means of production through heavy regulation. We have a president who wants the means of production to be taking off with private enterprise and has been reducing regulations. So he's actually literally the exact opposite of what fascism would be. Well, he's doing it, he's like a king, he thinks he's king and he's doing it for himself. He wants all this for himself and all these riches. If that's the case, then why is he donating away his presidential salary? Well, these oligarchs, okay, so if Elon Musk was in it for himself, and then why did he do the job for Doge for free? And if Trump was there to make sure his friends got richer, then why did he stop the subsidies for solar and EV and battery and the battery technology for electric vehicles, which hurt his buddy Elon Musk? Well, he's in it for his friends, really, because that sure wasn't for his friends. I've got a friend of mine who's in that industry, man, and he's now having to move everything around his business just to stay in business because the subsidies went bye-bye. So everything that Trump, the MAGA Republicans have been accused of has fallen on its face as being false. All you got to do is look. But the Democrats, especially with this recent beginning of a takeover of the party by the Democratic Socialists, which, let's be honest, are communists. They are anti-American communists. And I'm not name calling. They say it themselves. Their desire is to destroy the system, eliminate all opposition, and bring it up into a socialist system, a one-party controlled system. They're anti-American. They're anti-Constitution. The candidates are movies. Even some of these election rulings, the mail-in ballot one, I think it was Monday. Watson v. Republican National Convention, RNC, or Republican National Committee, actually. And they ruled that mail-in balloting and ballots showing up after Election Day is okay. And what it does, it opens up the opportunity for fraud. Doug, you can't say the fraud. Okay. Let's say that there was no fraud. There is fraud, whatever. But it opens up that opportunity. My dad used to tell me when I was a kid, don't put yourself into a bad situation if you don't want bad things happening. Don't allow for the opportunity. Let's say hypothetically, and I disagree with this statement, but let's say hypothetically, there's never ever been election fraud. Every election has been fair and free and safe and secure. Okay, fine. But the opportunity is there. When you have no chain of custody or almost no chain of custody, you can't track. You don't know where these ballots came from. They're showing up afterwards. And just suddenly, a batch can show up after Election Day, but they were postmarked by Election Day. And it just so happened that a large percentage of them went for the commie that was in third place, like in the LA mayoral race. What a coincidence. She really needed those votes. Boy, it's a good thing we have those mail-in ballots, right? Really? So the percentage of votes for mail-in wasn't even close to being similar to what happened on Election Day. It just drastically went for the third place person and launched her past the second place person who just so happened to be not a commie. And it was just enough, because what they did was they saw how much they needed. Then they produced that many through that's what they did. The birthright citizenship ruling, I know a lot of you, that's the reason why you tuned in. What Doug got to say about this? I've been saying it all along. I don't know who made me madder, John Roberts or Amy Coney Barrett. Amy Coney Barrett, false advertising, man. When you were being confirmed, woman, Justice Barrett, when you were being confirmed before the sin, you said you were an originalist. No, you're not. You're a leftist stooge. You used to be a law professor. Now I get it, because you were in academia. And I don't trust very many people in academia because of the infiltration by communism. And she ruled with the three knuckleheads: Sotomayor, Kagan, and I don't know what a woman is, Jackson. And then John Roberts, who I can't figure him out at all, because he used to do all right. And then once he became Chief Justice, he went off into a weird deep end. You remember the blackmail files that we've all believed that were being held over the head of Swalwell, and then they unleashed it once they decided he wasn't behaving right? That's what I think is going on with John Roberts. I think there's a blackmail file that floats over his head. But the reason why he really ticked me off was because of a statement he made in his judicial opinion. He said, well, there's no reasonable evidence to supporting Trump's view of birthright citizenship, that birthright citizenship is not simply just being born on American soil. Are you kidding me? The founding fathers, so first of all, let's talk about history. The founding fathers were, one of their big things was guarding against divided loyalty, guarding against divided allegiance, foreign allegiance infiltrating our system. They were afraid of the Tories trying to sabotage our system. The Tories were colony-born individuals who still held support for the British Empire. They consider themselves British subjects. So they designed the system to do what they could to weed out that foreign influence. Natural-born citizen, for example. Then, after the war between the states, and they're going to write a clause, a citizenship clause, for the purpose of making sure that the emancipated slaves and their children are seen as citizens, that there's no excuse for them to be denied anything as citizens of the United States. And so they wrote the clause in such a way to make sure, and it followed the language of something called the Civil Rights Act of 1866, that, hey, if you're born here and you're subject to America, you have American allegiance, you're not subject to a foreign power. You're subject to the full jurisdiction, which means you don't have allegiances elsewhere. Then you're a citizen. The guys who wrote that law were the guys who wrote the Citizenship Clause. They chose them on purpose. Senator Trumbull, Senator Howard, because that was their jam, man. That was their deal. They were all about the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and making sure that citizenship belonged only to those who had some sort of connection to America and had no foreign allegiance whatsoever. They were not subject to a foreign power. And they understood that while they were writing this clause for the emancipated slaves and their children, that it would be used also for citizenship in the future. This was the first time that citizenship definition was going to be in the Constitution, not just in law. They knew this. They recognized that it might be used to determine the citizenship of others. So they crafted it very carefully. And when asked about it in congressional testimony before Congress, May 30th of 1866, if you want to look it up in the congressional record of the time, Congressional Globe, they explain that. They say in their testimony that the Civil Rights Act of 1866 was a great influence, that the language of that law was a great influence, that they wanted to make sure that there was no divided allegiance, that the children of foreigners and aliens, diplomats, and other foreign consuls and ministers were not Americans. And included in that was also the children of Indians and Indians themselves, because their allegiance was to the tribe, not to America. Yeah, they're born on American soil, but their allegiance wasn't to America. Their allegiance was to their tribe. So you're not a citizen. Of course, they changed that with a law later, which was very unconstitutional. If you're going to be a citizen, citizen means something. You need to be subject to the full jurisdiction, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. That doesn't mean inside the border. That doesn't mean just subject to the laws. It means full jurisdiction, meaning everything that goes on with a citizen who has full allegiance to the United States. And to help you understand jurisdiction, if I'm in France, I am subject to their laws. I am inside their border. I am subject to the legal jurisdiction. I am not subject to their political jurisdiction. I can't just suddenly pull out my gun and say, all right to keep and bear arms. I'm not under America's political jurisdiction. I'm under their legal jurisdiction. I don't get their political jurisdiction. Someone visits here, same thing. They're subject to the laws. They're inside the border, but they're not going to be able to just go buy a gun. Why? They're not going to be able to vote. Why? They're not going to be able to be a juror, serve on a jury. Why? Because they're not subject to the full jurisdiction. They're visitors. And until they take that leap to renounce all foreign allegiances, they're not subject to the full jurisdiction thereof. That's what they meant. That's what they explained during their congressional testimony. And then John Roberts says, well, there's scant evidence that in a bull. And then on top of that, and I'm not going to list them all, but I wrote an article where I list them all. There are at least 6 or 7 cases before the Supreme Court in which it was defined through dicta that to be a citizen and a natural born citizen, in the case of some of these, a part of it is to avoid divided allegiance. You need to have parents that are citizens. You need to have some type of connection. But none of those were legally binding, so none of them were counted. And then there's all kinds of other laws that also, or not laws, but court cases, slaughterhouse cases, talk about citizenship. And then I get the lefty says, well, the court said so, and that's just the way it is. It'll be that way forever. No. In Garland versus the United States of 2019, Justice Clarence Thomas said that if a ruling is egregiously unconstitutional, it can be overturned. That was the purpose of the 14th Amendment Citizenship Clause, too. So overturn something. And to overturn something was egregiously wrong. Dred Scott opinion, which basically said that anyone who was ever a slave could never be a citizen. Roe v. Wade was egregiously unconstitutional, so it was invalidated. This can be invalidated. It can be turned around. But it's not going to be fixed if we keep allowing these communist, anti-American, socialist, collectivist, secular, anti-Christian, anti-American people to hold office and to infiltrate and infest our judicial branch, along with our legislative branch. And if ever one of them is president again, like Obama or Biden, and they have a majority in Congress, we're done. I mean, if we keep a majority in at least one of the houses, we might have a chance to survive the Democratic president, especially if the courts remain kind of reasonable as they are right now. You lose both houses and the presidency because, see, these people are not there to work with you. They don't want to add some flavor to the system that might make it better. Their plan is takeover. Their plan is elimination of their opposition forever. And they tell you that. That's not some conspiracy theory. Listen to these candidates that swept New York. That one crazy lady just won congressional Democratic primary in Colorado. Their goal is not to make America better. Their goal is to drive America horns first into the turf and kill it and to rebuild what they want. And when you have socialism, when you have communism, there is no innovation. Who innovates in a system like that? Because these big corporations that everybody wants to hate, and like I said, I don't hate the rich. I want to be one of them. And I appreciate them. I don't like it when they collude with government. So please don't play the binary game. Either you hate them or you love them. It's always three sides to every story, right? What he said, what she said, what really happened. You got the communists and the progressives and even establishment Republicans. I hate corporations. I got a lot of people listen to what I say. I hate all corporations. They all need to be. No, I don't hate all corporations. I'm glad we have big corporations. I'm glad we have the jobs and the products. But I'm not a fan of when they start colluding with government. I'm not happy when they start colluding with each other, when they use it for power and control. It's just like a gun. The gun's not the problem. It's the people behind it. The corporation's not the problem. It's the people behind them and how they're being used. Then you got the opposite extreme. Let them run wild. Citizens United. I'm somewhere in between. I recognize the importance of the free market system and people becoming wealthy, doing really well, and moving us in ways that, because get to realize behind all of these corporations, behind these businesses, behind all of these different things, there was somebody somewhere who had an idea, who did it for the incentive of doing well, who innovated, who stayed up late, keeping the store open, who risked everything, risked all their money, all their time, got, their wife left them or something like that. There's all kinds of things because nobody had the dream but them. And they didn't quit even when they were failing. And then after maybe a couple failures, they did it again. Everybody's like, hey man, are you stupid or something? Maybe that's God's way of saying you shouldn't have business. Darn it, I'm going to make it happen. I believe in this. And they stuck it out. And then suddenly one day, boom, they hit it. And it grows. And they invest it. And they open another one and they invest this. And before you know it, they're millionaires, billionaires, or maybe in the case of Elon, a trillionaire, at least for a moment. And now you're going to hate them? That's envy. I don't hate them. I'm proud of them. They made this country a wonderful place to live. Now, if they misuse it, if they direct that strength, that power, that wealth in bad directions, because it turns out that they've become evil or they were evil, then we'll guard against that. Stop buying their products, whatever. But it's not because they became wealthy and did well. It's because they are bad people. The problem is not corporations. The problem isn't guns. The problem isn't government. The problem isn't politics. The problem is evil people. And unfortunately, typically for this type of thing, it does attract that kind of persons because they want power, they want riches. So it's very hard to weed them out. But in a free market system, it's real easy. Stop buying their products. Stop voting for them. Stop giving them the time of day. And if enough of us do that, they go bye-bye. The problem is good people don't want to do all this because they don't want what comes with it. Well, guess what? The other side's still going to run for these things. They're still going to do these things. And if we don't have good people in there too, we got a problem. Because now it becomes dominated with the dirtbaggery of America. And now we've got this symptom that began with Alexander Hamilton. We need to centralize government just a little bit more. That expanded more through the Lincolnian Republicans. Government's got to be there to punish those southern states and to make sure we control this and that and this and that. To the Jacobins and the Fabians during the 19th century and their influences, to the progressive movement during the progressive era. Now the envelope's being pushed a little bit more. Now it's no longer just a symptom, it's become a small cancer. To the infiltration by the communists during the 1930s, now the cancer's growing. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, cancer grew massively. McCarthy era cut some of it out. Johnson, Lyndon B. Johnson, cancer came back and now it's worse. Into the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century, it is metastasized into a cancer that can kill the body if we don't get rid of it really fast. It's spreading to the organs. It's killing America. It began with small injections because, see, in the beginning, they understood that Americans were not hip with this. So what they did is they injected small doses here and there to normalize it. Then every once in a while, a radical would show up to make the sort of radical look okay. This was all a part of the plan. This was all orchestrated. This was all coordinated. And now we got a full-blown problem. And we've got to deal with it now. And that means we all need to be involved in the 2026 election. We all need to make sure the Democrats do not get control of either house. And we got to make sure that the next president is not a Democrat. And if somehow they pull it off that it is, at least one house is not democratically run, or they will drive this country nose first into the ground. They will destroy it. We will be the next. So, and understand something. The Bolsheviks didn't have this massive, unbelievable majority in Russia when the Russian Revolution changed Russia from the Soviet to the Soviet Union. They were but a few thousand, 10,000, something like that. They were a small percentage of the overall population. But they infiltrated, they infested the system enough to where it forced the ruling class beforehand to step down. And I'm not saying that the ruling class was something wonderful. It wasn't. Talking about jumping out of the pan and into the fire. And I hear people, well, yeah, but Doug, the majority of Americans don't believe in that stuff. It can't happen as long. Baloney. They're fooling just enough people. They're grabbing just enough amount of the reins in government. And they've got, I believe, about 70% of the federal court system. And they'll do what they've done in Hollywood to you. They will blacklist you if you're not a secular leftist commie. If you're a Christian, if you're conservative in Hollywood, you get blacklisted. Just ask Kevin Sorbo. Ask Dean Cain. Kirk Cameron. Ask them. John Voight, been one lately. Robert Davi. Can't get work anymore. You're blacklisted, because that's what the left does. That's what communism, socialism, that's what this mentality does. It takes control and it destroys any opposition, because, and then it tears down any memory of that. This is the reason why they were tearing down statues. Anything, it's total George Orwell, right? Total Orwellian. The best way to keep people from remembering is remove everything that might trigger that memory. And eventually the people who do remember will die, and then you'll have the younger people who grew up without seeing all those things. The statues are gone. The history books have been rewritten. And the opposition is no longer in office, is what their goal is. And then America will have its century-long nightmare, like the Soviet Union did. And it's still feeling the repercussions. Home ownership is not exactly a big deal yet in Russia, even though the walls came down 40 years ago. Or 30 years ago. Berlin Wall. They still live in tiny little apartments with no curtains so that they can't hide that they might have something that everybody else doesn't have. John Adams said that liberty once lost is lost forever. I don't agree. I believe it can be regained, but not easy. It'll take generations. We have something special here in America. And we've had it for 250 years. I'm excited about Saturday. I'm excited about 250 years celebration. Where I live, you can still get fireworks, and we got them, and we're going to enjoy them. We're cracking up about that. I used to live in California, the LA area. People smuggle in their fireworks, but boy, you get caught. It's a big deal. Man, we got sparklers, we got little rockets, we got firecrackers, and we got fire extinguishers just in case. I'm excited. American freedom for 250 years and the right president in there to celebrate it. And no, he's not doing it for him. He's doing it for America. If he was doing it for him, he wouldn't have cut off Elon Musk's subsidies, and he wouldn't be donating his salary as president of the United States. He doesn't do it for him. He does it for America. They're projecting. They do it for them. If you hear a lefty say something and accuse you of something, chances are they're the ones that are guilty of it. Because that's what they do. And I always hated the us versus them thing, but it really has become that. And as they head farther towards communism, we need to head closer to the Constitution. The original intent. Thank you for spending the time with me. This show, for those of you who are not familiar, used to be on AM FM radio down in San Diego. Salem Media, matter of fact. I moved out of Southern California. I was no longer near the studio anymore. Lost all my advertising. So the show could no longer be funded. We lost so much money on it that I had to finally shut it down. So I moved it here. Rumble.com/Douglas V. Gibbs, YouTube.com/Douglas V. Gibbs, and anywhere else this thing might show. I'm a radio guy, so sorry for the long videos if you're looking for something short. I got short ones coming. I still got to finish organizing them. And I'll wrap it up with United We Stand, combined to a kick butt. God bless America, my friends. God bless you. Thank you for spending the hour with me. God bless America. God bless you. God bless this place. America 250. I'm so excited. Visit me, DouglasVGibbs.com. I write just about every day. When I fall behind, I'll write 2 or 3 in a day, but I write articles pretty much every day. You can also see my writing at places like Canada Free Press, Before It's News, stuff like that. But DouglasVGibbs.com is the best place. Want to buy my books? Navigation2Liberty.com, navigation, the number 2, liberty.com, navigation, the number 2, liberty.com. You got a new one coming out, Constitutional Presidency of Donald J. Trump. Matter of a couple weeks. Watch for it. Thanks for spending time with me. God bless. We'll see you next time. Bye.